Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Oh, okay, I do capacity building, and in capacity building, when your class is sleeping, you know that you have lost. So, presentation, please. Okay, I'm going to talk about how we create partnerships in order to build competence, in order to enable our operations in the oil and gas business. And you know, in our operations, it's not only us. We need the regulators, we need the suppliers, we need the community, so that at least we can have a successful business that creates value for everybody. Okay, so how do we define how we collaborate when we are doing our business in investing in capacity building? So here, you know, we are an oil and gas company, and what we do, we have something we call we have a toolbox which we use to define how we are going to do collaborations. First, we look at what capacity is available in country. This is data from, I heard from a conversation from the Ministry of Labor, is that how we have high skill level. That high skill level is something from tertiary, and tertiary is somebody who has a university degree, and mid is somebody who has vocational education, and low skill is just a tradesman. These are the data we have, and this is the Vision 2025 to increase it to 12%. And we know in our industry, most of the people which we employ in management level will be the high skill level, and in our operations, we'll have people in the mid-level, and we have few people maybe in our supplies. Those are the ones who will work supplying our industry. And we look at what do we need as an industry, and not only us, because if you don't have competency in the regulatory sector, in the policy sector, and also in the local community, it means you cannot really do well in your business. And then we look at Tanzania needs, that is people apart from our operations. And then also we look at what are the available resources. We have various levels of training institutions in country, and then there's also local knowledge, and then there's international interventions, and we also have people who are working in building capacities, especially you have these donor agencies, you have various other partnerships, you have other oil and gas companies, so you look at them and then you see, with this, what kind of intervention should I look at? And then we identify the gaps that this is what Tanzania needs to support our sector. This is what we need as a oil and gas company to develop our business. But what are the training and capacity building opportunities available in countries? You have old and established universities, technical and vocational education centers. You also have collaborations with international organizations which are also building capacity in the country. And then we define an objective. When you define an objective, you want what kind of intervention do you need to have? Do you want to build skills in terms of people? Do you want to build the institutions that are providing the skills such that you can have a longer time in getting your supply of labor? Because we'll be here for about 3 to 4 decades. So you need skills to support you in all those areas. And then also, do you need to raise awareness, especially maybe in your supply base? You need to raise awareness, or even in the community, so that they can also take steps in order to be able to participate in the sector. So after that, when you've done that, you know what you have, you know what you need, you know which area you want to intervene. Is it individuals? Is it an institution, or is it to raise awareness? Then you look and decide, this is the partner which I would like to engage in because of their capacity and their experience. So from that, what we have done up to now as Equi Tanzania, we have increased the number of skilled workforces. To increase the number of skilled workforce, we have provided scholarship for tertiary education, especially at master's level, so that people can have enough skills to work in the oil and gas sector. And we have focused mainly on petroleum engineering, petroleum geology, and oil and gas finance. Those are the key areas we've formed with, and that partnership, we've worked with the University of Dar es Salaam in collaboration with universities in Norway, because they've been doing that for the past many years, and we've collaborated between the two so that at least we can have some of the skilled workforce studied partly in Norway, some of the skilled workforce studied in Tanzania. And then we've also worked with institutions, because we are here for 3 decades. We need to make sure that we can have our supply for the whole this time. So we worked also with University of Dar es Salaam Business School for the finance and economics. We've worked with the University of Dar es Salaam Mining Engineering to build that we have a petroleum education here in Tanzania, petroleum engineering for upstream, midstream, and what is called midstream and downstream. And on top of that, we have also worked with the University of Dodoma in petroleum geology. So we have 3 established courses which people can register in Tanzania and study. And in terms of awareness, we've been conducting various guest lectures to the universities, especially in Dodoma, Minerals Resource Institute, some institutions in Mtwara, so that at least they can know which kind of standards which they are expected and which kind of opportunities and services and at which stage. Because sometimes somebody invests in something and then they miss, this is the exploration phase, they miss it, or they miss the development phase. And with that, we also had various guest lectures say this is an industry which is highly focused on safety and technology, so that at least people will know, in order for you to participate, these are the kinds of things you should do. Tusentak.
Asante. Thanks a lot, Martha, for a very quick snapshot of what Equino Tanzania is doing in terms of the approach and what you're focusing on in terms of capacity building, in terms of skills enhancement, and in terms of creating awareness of what you are doing. So another aspect that I'd like us to look at, and this will be interrogated by our next speaker, Dr. Gwamaka, environment sustainability. Environmental protection presents both an opportunity for local content, but could also be a risk if not well done to environmental sustainability. So what is the National Environment Management Council doing? Please, you have the floor for 5 minutes or 10 max.
Thank you very much. I'll just go quick because of time. The National Environmental Management Council, is the implementer for the national legal and regulatory framework in environment governing the oil and gas industry. Tanzania generally has put in place a comprehensive legal and regulatory framework regulating the petroleum exploration and production industry. There are various substantive and subsidiary laws which affect performance and activities of the petroleum development, and they have been enacted to protect the public health and the environment. When you are opening new areas for oil and gas activities, you require an EIA, which is an environmental impact assessment. And then it goes to the stages of environmental monitoring and so forth and so forth. Now, the Environmental Management Act of 2004 is the key environmental legislation governing environmental or compliance in the oil and gas industry. It was enacted in 2004, and the audit and environmental impact assessment and audit were enacted in 2005. There are several players or actors in the oil and gas industry which are regulating issues of safety, health, and environment. Okay, NEMC itself, okay, but also you have OSHA, government chemical laboratory agencies, and others. But also, NEMC also oversees other legislations, okay, in association with others. You have the Petroleum Exploration Act of 1980, Petroleum Act of 2008, which governs petroleum downstream operations, the income tax, and so forth. But when we focus now on the EMA 2004, okay, which is the principal legislation, we have regulations which the oil and gas industry has to comply. We have the Environmental Management, Hazardous Waste and Control Management Regulations of 2019, which means all issues of hazardous waste, okay, has to be monitored through this one. There is the Environmental Management Solid Waste Regulations of 2008. It governs issues of solid waste management. You have Environmental Management Air Quality Standards Regulations. Oil and gas, they do what we call flaring and a lot of others. Okay, there is water quality standards, there is soil quality standards, there is environmental control of noise and vibrations, there is environmental inspectors, but also environmental fees and charges regulations, which means the oil and gas also has to adhere to some charges and regulations, okay, in respect of environmental management. Now, an EIA is mandatory for all oil and gas industries or all oil and gas projects. And this is specified in the third schedule of the EMA 2004, which is read together with first schedule of EIA and audit regulations of 2005. The EIA is a process of identifying, predicting, evaluating, and mitigating the biophysical, social, and other relevant effects of development proposal prior to major decisions being taken and commitments being made. So before commencement of any project, an EIA should be conducted, which involves registration, screening, scoping, and approval of the terms of reference. And the submission of the EIS, the environmental impact statements, and the review of the code of the document is done before the recommendations are sent to the minister responsible for environment for issuance of the environmental impact assessment certificate. So the process extends from the initial concept of the proposal through implementation to completion, and where appropriate, all the way to the decommissioning stage. When we talk about compliance, the Council, in collaboration with other sector ministries, conduct inspections in the facilities. And these inspections usually are conducted to check compliance of the facility, whether you are complying with all pieces of legislations, whether environmental monitoring plan that you have presented in the report, okay, and that you submitted to our council is being followed, but also to check whether you are doing international best practice. The oil and gas projects that were implemented after 2004, most of them complied with this one, and they are doing well. Now, when we are checking on the compliance, key issues, the objective that we are looking at is to check whether the enterprise or whether the facility is in compliance with legal framework, but also to collect evidence in case you are non-complying, and to ensure that necessary and correct enforcement actions are taken. But also to ensure the quality of reported data, because you are supposed to be providing with reports, so the data also have to be checked in terms of quality. But also to check that a system of internal control that has been established, whether it is functioning, but also to improve environmental quality. In these, we use the methods of reviewing the annual reports that you supply to our council. Okay, we have letters that we exchange between parties, but also we conduct physical inspections, but also environmental audits, but also where you have accidental discharges, okay, investigations are normally done. Now, among the non-compliance which we have observed in many of these oil and gas industries, first of all is the permits which are relevant to the operation of the facility. Most of them are not in place. For example, when you are doing firing, you need a firing permit. Okay, this one is contained in the Environmental Management Fees and Charges Regulations of 2018. Okay, so this needs to be observed. But also water abstraction permit, okay, which is in the Water Resources Management Act, water discharge permit, which is in the Water Resources Management Act. Those, most of them are rarely not complied. They are rarely complied. But also others are annual environmental reports from the facility operation. Most of them have not been prepared and submitted to the council in accordance with the requirement of the Environmental Management Act. And the facilities also most of them do not have also groundwater monitoring points. When you have drilled a well, do you have the ground monitoring system whereby you are able to identify whether the groundwater aquifer are being polluted, okay? Or waste which they are being discharged from the drilling, okay? Most of them are given to the contractors, but there is rarely follow-up that is done on the competence of these contractors to dispose these waste streams in an environmentally friendly manner. We have other environmental challenges, especially for offshore exploration, appraisal, and development drilling, such as discharge of untreated liquid waste, drilling, such as drilling fluids and ballast water to seabed. So most of them are discharged to seabed. It's a challenge. Disposal of untreated drill cuttings with oil contents from oil-based mud and other hazardous waste to seabed. Absence of adequate facilities to treat drill cuttings and effluents from oil-based mud, but also absence of baseline conditions of the seabed prior to drilling. Most of the drilling are taken, but now, before you drill, do you conduct baseline assessment of the offshore sites? But you also have seabed conditions. Most of the seabed conditions are only known during drilling, when a remotely operated vehicle is fixed to the drill ship before the start of the drilling activity. So we have a number of these that we consider them as challenges. Absence of contingency plan on accidental oil spill and fire outbreak in case of blowouts during exploration drilling. Limitations to monitoring of the activities due to limited number of people which are required to visit the sites. There is a complicated transport arrangement between the offshore drilling sites, okay, with the land, but also few petroleum geologists and engineers within the council and nationally for monitoring these activities, but also absence of adequate technology to monitor offshore wells and pipelines. Most of them are far away in the sea. Now, how do you keep on monitoring them where they are? Inadequate knowledge by key stakeholders in the surrounding community on impacts that may arise from oil and gas projects implementation. So these are some of the challenges that we have, okay, in regard to this. But now,
you may wish to look at the board in front of you here.
Sorry? Okay, thank you very much. To conclude, I could say that we still need to do a lot of work in terms of mitigating impacts and monitoring impacts which are resulting from oil and exploration drilling in oil and gas industry. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Gwamaka. I think you'll agree, and thanks a lot for emphasis on compliance and also addressing or identifying some of the challenges. We all agree if we don't address or focus on issues of environment, then your license to operate is at risk as an IOC. So thanks. Now let me throw the ball to Twaha, representing the Regional Commissioner. And probably the question to you in your 5-10 minutes, in terms of preparedness, how are you prepared to take advantage of opportunities available in this local content discussion? What are the challenges? And do you think we are forming the right partnerships?
Thank you ever so much. First of all, I'm so honored to represent the Regional Commissioner. He has put so much trust on me to come here and represent him on this particular very important session. But having said so, I did prepare the so-called slide on this particular discussion here, if you like, but very unfortunately, I'll have to change according to the tune, simply because the first speaker, when she came here, she has represented the investors. Being the case, therefore, because I'm representing the Regional Commissioner, so to speak, the regional government, I'll have to speak it from the government perspective point of view. So I'll have to apologize to you guys because I'm not going to use the end of the slide, but I'll be talking straightforward according to the question that has been posed to me, and in addition to that, according to the first speaker, the way she did express her opinion. In terms of local content and the opportunity of which we do expect to take, we as a LIND, or as a government, so to speak, it goes without saying that there are a number of challenges which are involved in this particular aspect. One of the challenges is all about awareness of our people. And I understand for sure that in order to cater that particular question of awareness, we as a government of Lindi, we have prepared ourselves to go through the VETA programs whereby we do train our youth so that they could have some of enhancing kind of like skills of which they can be in a better position to be used when they are required. And in addition to that, let me stress a point to the investor. By the time when you leave in this particular hall, I want you to have a message that Lindi as a Lindi, we have well prepared in such a way that all the investors, whatever they want to get, they will get it from Lindi. Number one, in terms of the skills, we know for sure that we're going to have to train these people. But in order for us to train these people, we need to have a kind of support. So you, as an investor, we expect you to join us in hand so that to make sure that we train these particular young girls and boys so that they can be able to be used for that particular opportunity once and it arises. But in addition to that, I know as far as the regional commissioner is concerned himself, he has prepared a number of strategies in order to make sure that we get well prepared with the so-called opportunity which is coming toward us for LNG plant. Some of the programs that have been prepared from the district level, as you understand, I don't have to talk much about oil and gas in Lindi because that is the core area. But the fact of the matter is, the entire region of Lindi is covered with a plenty of opportunity. Because of that particular fact, we have also prepared some of the classes from the district levels. Our people's youth, boys and girls, they normally meet together monthly and weekly to discuss about the issues and as to how we can be able to move them from point 1 to point B in terms of having the required skills and knowledge which will be able to assist them to get a job opportunity when this particular LNG plant is going to be prepared. But moving away from there, there's another fundamental issue from the perspective of the government at large. This is something which has been magnified, not only in Lindi, but a country at large. The opportunities which are there for the investors, we make sure that as a local indigenous, they are the one who are going to be given an opportunity. So we argue you as an investor to make sure that to give us an opportunity, by the time when we train this particular young boy, when they come to you to knock the door, you know for sure that, wow, these are the indigenous, and then you give them an opportunity. That is number one. But in addition to that, I must also stress something which is paramount important. I know the moderator has never asked me about it, but it is very important to discuss it as well. The corporate social responsibility. We understand for sure that you guys, you have done a lot, but you need to do more, so to speak. I know for sure that between 2014 to 2018, you have invested almost about 6.2 billion. That is a huge substantial amount of money. But the question is, have we done the right things as far as the corporate social responsibility is concerned? Have we touched what the requirement of the individuals, I mean the local community guys? The reason why I'm saying it is that, for example, some of the investors, when they do the so-called corporate social responsibility, somehow it happens they do things of which the community do not need it. For example, when the community needs to have in a hospital, somebody will be coming there to provide a motorbike. In fact, well, it is a corporate social responsibility, but is it the right things? If it is what the community requires. So in this particular aspect, we need to look in the broader sense. By the time when you do the corporate social responsibility, it is paramount important we consult the regional level so that we can be able to tell you what exactly is required at the bottom level. This is number one. But number two, as far as the corporate social responsibility issue is concerned, there is an issue there in terms of accountability. We get a lot of problems somewhere along the line because you find an investor will be coming there to do the corporate social responsibility aspect. By the time when you go and inspect what has been done over there, you get amazed. Somehow you're thinking like, wow, this money which has been poured down here, has it been supervised the way it should be? In fact, not. So we need to have a cooperation between the investors and the government. By the time when you perform the corporate social responsibility, please make sure that you consult the regional government so that we can be able to provide you the technical know-how in terms of the supervision, in terms of the engineer, in terms of the other sectors of the government who can be in a better position to count value for money. Because this is the most important things. Today, I'm standing here, I'm talking to you guys saying that, well, you have already invested about 6.7 billion, so to speak. But when you go on the field itself, to look value for money is something which is very questionable. So I argue once again, kindly, as far as the concept of the corporate social responsibility, we're humbly requesting you guys to come and consult us once again. In case if you need any assistance, we should be in a better position to provide that particular assistance. To close the remark, I know the time is not sufficient enough. Well, the reason why I'm here today is only because the regional commissioner is not around. And is not around simply because of the very important issue, and that is the Uhuru Tochi extinction, which is going to take place in Lindi, and that is going to be on the 14th of this particular month. And as you understand, Honorable President Dr. John Pombe Magufuli is going to be the guest of honor on that particular ceremony. So the message which I begin to convey to you is to welcome you all to participate on that particular day. But in addition to that, kindly feel free to contribute in any shape or fashion, simply because that particular contribution is still underway. And I know this is not the fundraising platform, but I think it is paramount important for me just to throw the ball to you so that you can be in a better position to contribute something. I know for sure that now you're smiling, and your smiling is telling me that you're ready to contribute. Thank you ever so much for listening.
I think you're in the wrong profession. You should be in marketing or something. so thanks a lot, Twa, for an excellent pitch of what Lindi region offers, but also your thoughts on what you think could be done. And I think towards the end, the issues we've raised about corporate social responsibilities, the investments that companies are made, and the perception that probably sometimes you have on whether there was value for money. Let me invite our colleague from PCCB, because they also look at value for money. So what do you think we should be cautious, aware of, or worried about on whenever we are doing partnerships, corporate social responsibilities, and local content? Joseph, if you could be as economical as Twaha, we will really appreciate in terms of the time.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, my name is Joseph Moiswell from PCCB, Prevention and Combating of Corruption Bureau. I would like to introduce this Prevention and Combating of Corruption Bureau. At least you know it, so that when I proceed, then you know where I'm coming from. Yeah, this is a government institution whose objectives are: one, promotion for good governance principles; second, eradication of corruption. Now, we are here gathered as practitioners or actors in the oil and gas industry, but for sure we know that corruption is within us. So I'm here now to explain something about corruption, effects, and how we can combat it. I had a presentation of a number of slides, but I'll go through very few slides so that we can move together and have a common understanding on the issue of corruption. My fellows here talked about low content and corporate social responsibility, and he was talking about the issue of value for money also, But I would like to remind you that according to our constitution, I think Article 8, the government of Tanzania is obliged to make sure that the economy is growing sustainably in Tanzania, and also the welfare of its citizens is well and sustainable. But again, if, and again, natural resources that we have are our blessings to make sure that the economy is growing and the welfare is good. But once corruption is allowed to be within this industry, then we expecting that the government will be hampered from making sure that the improvement of the economy is growing and the welfare of citizens is well. And also, corruption is going to undermine the principle of good governance, and therefore, in the oil and gas industry, we will not witness transparency and accountability. And again, we understand that when corruption is allowed within the country, then think about the violation of human rights. You will see human rights are violated, and also poor will be very hard, because corruption tends to divert funds from the development projects to individuals' ones. So you find that the majority suffers a lot at the expense of the few. So that's why we are saying, if at all we want to prosper or to grow in terms of economy, then we have to fight corruption. Again, corruption will distort the markets, and also sometimes it erodes the quality of life. When I say the markets, I think for those who are in the oil and industry, you will find there are some people who are playing with the market intervention so that those are benefiting, you find there are few. And also corruption allows organized crime, terrorism, and other offenses. When there is corruption, then expect to have terrorism, because corruption fuels much these. And also, we find that corruption undermines the government ability to provide basic services like health, education, and also feeding inequality. When we talk of feeding inequalities, where now we come to the corporate social responsibility. If corruption is allowed in corporate social responsibility, then expect it to have inequality, because the modality that is used in corporate social responsibility has got a very, very big discretion. And we know that when there is monopoly and discretion, then expect to have corruption. So if corporate social responsibility is not well regulated, then expect it to have inequality in the society. Again, it undermines the objectives of local content policy and the other policies. Now, what is done in the government to make sure that corruption is fought squarely is to have an effective legal framework. We know that we have laws which regulate the oil and industry, and also we have effective institutional framework. And nowadays we are trying to coordinate the skilled human resources so that in the oil and industry, human resources is available. And the important thing, another one, is to involve local community when you are dealing with the oil industry. To finish up, let me go what actors are supposed to do, actors in the oil and industry are supposed to do so that we combat together corruption. First of all, we have to uphold the principle of good governance, like accountability. Actors in the oil and gas industry should be accountable to whatever they do. There should be transparency in whatever endeavors that you are doing in oil and industry. And also, for our case of the government, there should be predictability. The laws should be predictable. so that the development of the industry is sustainable. Again, we need to have capacity building, institutional ones and human resource ones. We need to have participation in terms of people, especially local community where you want to invest, so that they own that investment. And again, we need to implement best practices and integrity practice that we have in our organizations. And we should provide satisfactory supervision, as my fellow when he was talking about corporate service responsibility, and also improve control mechanism within your industry so that corruption is fought. Yeah, by so few words, I would like you all to say no to corruption. Please say no to corruption. Thank you very much. If it comes from your heart, thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. I think when he was talking about the CSR, inequality, corruption, this morning I think I was listening to BBC, or last night, about the story of the son of Angolan president who has been arrested because of, I think, a $1.5 billion corruption scandal. And as we know, Angola is oil rich. But also, if you look at the inequality index, some of the most unequal countries in Africa are the resource-rich countries. So it means there is something that is not being done right on areas of curbing corruption. So it's important to bring that conversation to the fore. So I have 3 questions to ask my colleagues here, but also all of you. One, are we doing the best as companies to provide local content? Number 2, are we doing the best as the government in preparing our people to take advantage? Number 3, are we creating the right partnerships to take advantage of the opportunities? Any one of you can respond to any of the questions. You can sit, I think, if the mic works, try the one on your right or on your left, if it works. You can. But also I invite anyone to respond to any of those questions. But if you are invited, please spend a minute or 2 maximum to make your contribution so that we can have as many contributors as possible. Are we doing enough? Are we doing the best?
Well, thanks you, moderator. Let me go by saying that we are doing enough, but we are not doing the best, because there's a lot of way that need to go in such a way that we can be able to cooperate between the investor and the government so that we can be able to reach somewhere and make our people to enjoy that particular benefit or the cake of the nations. For example, if I requested the investors to come and invest more in terms of education areas like VETAs and other trainings, that would be more than enough. And the government will be providing all the facilities so that we can be able to push our youth, girls and boys, to go to the colleges and get training so that they can be able to be utilized with these particular investors.
Thank you. So we are doing enough, but not the best. Martha. And I'm looking at hands.
Well, my microphone is not working now. I'm going to lend yours. I think from the company's side, our investment in capacity building is dependent on the stage of the project. And from what we've done, like Equi, since we got our PSA, and once you sign your PSA and you have your exploration license, you have some time which you need to start drilling, do all your commitment, and submit a report to the regulator or the license holder at that particular moment. So the skill needed at that particular time with Tanzania has been here. It has been doing a lot of logistics, although it's not in particular to the oil and gas industry. What was missing was petroleum engineers and geologists at that particular moment. So I think from that, we did do the right get the right partnerships, because in our education, we've always involved the local institution to ensure that it is sustainable and technology is transferred between the other institutions to this local institution. So we've done enough according to the stages of the project, and much more is expected because we'll go into LNG, and that means we'll have to have another strategy.
Now you are deprived of a speaking microphone, so you might either scream or stand over there. Taji, you may wish to help probably for the next session. Those two mics there are not working. Yeah, please. So I would like to see hands from the audience, or if you have any question to any of the panelists, this is your opportunity. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Much has been done, but I think we have to rethink the way we are moving, especially when we talk of public-private partnership. There is a component which is very important, the issue of transparency. If we don't consider these aspects, then these public-private partnership will not be realized. We need to have transparency on the part of the government, similarly on the part of the private sector. Otherwise, it will be a kind of a jungle. Someone doing things which are not known to another person. So these things is very important. Again, is the issue of accountability. We need to be accountable to what we are doing. If we are going together, like public partnership agreement is concerned, then we need to be common understanding, common goal, public-private partnership. Where are we heading to? We have to go together. Otherwise, someone will be left behind. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. Shell, any comment on anything? Now I should prompt people.
Hi, my name is Patricia. I'm External Relations Manager, Shell. So just to comment on the general discussion there, I think for any good corporate citizen or responsible investor, I think local content should be an important aspect of any business. And for Shell, we are committed in local content. And that's why for the last few years, maybe 7 to 8, we have invested significantly in social investment programs that directly support skills development, capacity building, supporting local content initiatives. And our approach has been to look at the different skill set of different skills from secondary education all the way to higher education. Because we think, for example, our project will go through different phases, and we believe that the different skill sets will be required in different phases of the project. So, our focus has been to high impact, high value projects, and this is because we've been partnering with different stakeholders. We've been ensuring that before we start designing any project, we engage with different stakeholders, local governments, government, and other stakeholders. But also when we do these programs, before we even start, we ensure that internally we do the right due diligence. We ensure that we comply with all the ethical standards. So I think, I support the discussion that local content is key, is important, and, and there need to be partnerships and engagement and networking with different stakeholders to ensure that everybody is supported to, for example, for the LNG project, is supported to participate in the oil and gas economy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Patricia. Yes, Honorable Member of Parliament.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the presenters. I know all companies, always governments advise them to include local content in their programs. But when it comes to employment, you find that top management you find that people bring in experts coming from outside the countries, and the indigenous people are given the lower jobs. What mechanisms do you apply to ensure that at least even the indigenous people are included in top management?
That's a question to IOCs. What are we doing to ensure we have locals or Tanzanians in top management? I will throw it to do you want? No, we'll come back to that, don't worry. There's a hand over there. Yes, sir.
My name is Emmanuel Tayali, and on my opinion is the concept of local content is very lashed. And I can tell this from the experience of ECOP. When the ECOP started, obviously people start talking about the project, but the key problem is the oil companies and the government they are very busy negotiating. So there is no enough time to educate the business community and the community at large to understand the quality requirements and the requirements which will come to the packages. Mm-hmm. So in consequences, when the expression of interest or opportunities start to pop out, most of these companies or private sector is not leading. So I think if I can give an advice of best lesson learned from the ECOP project is we might have LNG project 3, 4, 5 years to come. However, if we are very serious about local content, what we're supposed to be doing now is to start digesting what is the project about, what are the quality, what are the requirements. Those are kind of things because they are very standardized based to what happened in other countries.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Yes. Any other contribution? You want to give us experience from Uganda? Probably in a word or two, you'll speak in the next session. Okay, thank you. And yes, just brief, yes.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kushangaki. I'm the CSR manager for Pan-African Energy. Just wanted to give a brief in terms of the best practice that we as Pan-African Energy we've been doing in Songo Island or Kilwa District in particular. In terms of doing CSR projects, what we do, as my colleague from PCB said, what we do exhaustive consultation with the community, but also we do our own due diligence to make sure the project that we are going to sponsor will it benefit the community and not benefit the company. But also, most importantly, we are being very transparent by signing an MOU with the district council, for our case, Kilwa District Council. So we have got almost MOU for every project that we do within the Kilwa district to show our transparency, but also that we want to act ethically. And during also project implementation, we involve the council or the local or community in terms of supervision, and at the end of the day, the handover. So what we do, we want to make sure that all these projects benefit the community and not the companies. It's not like we want to get a praise, but we want to do something, we want to give back to the community to make sure that the area that we operate benefit from the flow of the natural gas.
Asante sana. So let me bring it back now to the panelists, probably for your final comments, also a response to a specific question, so that we allow other sessions to proceed. Let me start with my left, Joseph. Oh, sorry. Let me start with my right. Twaha.
Thanks, moderator, once again for giving me this particular opportunity. Wow, it's quite interesting, really. There is one thing which I have observed, and you know, when you talk about business equations, the partnership between the government and the private sectors, there is always a problem somewhere in between, just like my colleague said. The private sectors, the equation of the business is business plus activity is equal to profits. This is number one. But when you come to the government, and activities which is going to be done is equal to services. We provide service to the people. So the most important thing here is to be very close and to have a mutual understanding between the two parties, i.e. the government and the private or corporate citizen, private corporate citizen if you like. If we don't have that, we're going to have a problem now and then. We talk about local content, we talk about this, we talk about that. I'll just give a very simple example. For example, my colleague said that they need the skills according to the stage of the programs. Now, if I were me, what I would do, for example, I said, okay, hang on, here is Tanzania, I'm coming here to invest. LNG plant is going to be the massive project, which is going to benefit the countries and even the corporate citizen as well. What I'm going to do, I'm going to chunk a huge amount of money to build a university, for example, of which it will be able to train people from the lower level, diplomas, degree, and you name it. That being the case, therefore, by the time when that particular project is on, you have the ready-made products. I mean, a person who is well qualified. But in order to do this, there should be a seriousness and mutual understanding and openness, just like the director of the first speaker spoke here in relation to this openness and everything of that nature. So what I'm trying to argue and say in conclusion is we should be in a better position to come together and to have one goal. I know the goal of the investor is profit, but the goal of the government is provision of services. So to have the combination of the two is a bit of a challenge. But what we need to do, we have to come to the table to some point so that we can be able to have a conclusion and the benefits for all of us.
Thanks a lot, Twa. Dr. Gwamaka?
Thank you. Corporate social responsibility is one of the compliance aspects that our council also monitors. And we know that a lot of oil and gas companies are doing that, but now there is need to integrate those data through providing annual reports, okay, to our council. Then we are able to determine as to how much you have complied. But now one aspect that also probably require improvement is that we have established a number of training institutions in oil and gas, okay, Dodoma University, University of Dar es Salaam, and a lot of students have graduated. And then all of a sudden, most of them don't have employment. So there is need a bit to integrate. Okay, if we are training them, then in which aspects are we training them? How do we bring that capacity, especially with respect to if you are drilling, then, okay, at what portion, production, and so forth. Let them get experience then, you know, through that. And I think there's need to iron out that one as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Dr. Gwamaka. Martha?
Thank you. First, I'd like to respond to the Honorable Member of Parliament. When a company starts, you know, when you go into a new area, it's like when you are building your house. You have to get the most experienced people on the ground such that you can make sure that your business will succeed. And then during that time, that is when you train and groom people, and you also look into the area that you are, that you have good people that you can put in leadership positions. So in the beginning, most companies will have people with the relevant experience. And if you look, actually, Samahani, they are a bit old, so that they can bring that experience and also the learnings and make sure that your business will sustain and succeed. And then during that time, you train and then you get leaders in place. Because we at Equinor, we also have management positions held by Tanzanians. We do have those, but we've only been signed a PSA in about 10 years. We only started drilling for about 12 years, and also we are going into production. You know, the extractive industry, each state has some sort of management, it's like a frame. People who do exploration are not the people who do development, are not the people who do production. So we have people at different stages. But people have been groomed. There's even specific training for ladies. That is why you see me, I'm sitting here. So, and also I'm acting for my boss, and my boss is a lady also. So we have specific programs to increase the number of nationals in any area which we operate in to be held by locals. But we are still in the initial phase of the project, and we need our business to stand. And with that, you cannot take an inexperienced person. Once you stand, you are grooming a person to take your position.
Thanks, Martha. And I can see your boss is very happy, saying, yeah, you did it. So, but let me be controversial, with due respect. I look at big international companies in the US or elsewhere, and you look at the top, for example, the top boss. They are from India, they are from God knows. So I think for me, my emphasis is going to be a lot more on the value creation than who is holding what position. For me, actually, the most successful organizations are the most multicultural organizations. You see, so I don't know, I'm being controversial and I'm speaking as I'm thinking. So probably I don't know what I'm talking about. Joseph.
Yeah, thank you.
sorry, Tarun, we'll come back. We'll come back to you. Let's go to Joseph and then come back to you, Mheshimiwa.
Yeah, thank you very much. The message coming from the PCCB, I would like, would be like this. First of all, we need to understand that corruption is an enemy. If all of us will understand that thing, then we'll fight it. And I would like to remind a message from the late Mwalimu Nyerere. If you remember, on May 17th, 1960, he pronounced corruption as an enemy. Maybe allow me to read it so that people could see what the Mwalimu Nyerere said. At that time, he was a leader of opposition in parliament in 1960. The late Mwalimu Nyerere said, Mr. Speaker, let me also take this opportunity to add corruption to the list of the three enemies which consistently afflict our otherwise peaceful community, namely poverty, ignorance, and disease. I believe it is now necessary to add the fourth enemy to that list, and that enemy is corruption. This indeed is necessary because even though we can endeavor to marshal efforts and resources to deal with the issue or issues of poverty, ignorance, and disease, it must be realized that all such efforts can effectively be reduced to naught simply through corrupt acts perpetrated by leaders. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, the issue of corruption must be confronted with all the seriousness it deserves, for it is a ruthless enemy that can cause even greater harm to the people during peacetime than the harm which results from armed conflict during wartime. The end of quotation. So I would like to invite you to join our hands in the fight against corruption. And one of the things that the companies could do, they should have an anti-corruption policy and implement it in their companies. And also they have to adhere to the best practices, principles, and ethical values so that we fight corruption together by changing the mindset that there is an enemy, the enemy is corruption, and we have to fight it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph. Thanks a lot. Also for a 1960 court. That's very interesting. Now, our session was for 1 hour, and now it's pretty much an hour. And just in time, because I was given a bit of 1 or 2 minutes to wait for the participants of the next session, which will be facilitated by none other than the British High Commissioner. So I know, Honorable Member of Parliament, you wanted to contribute, I think, but allow me to thank my colleagues in the panel for very concise contributions to the topic, and to thank you for the contributions and being patient and being awake after lunch. So I urge you to continue being awake when the next session comes on. Asanteni sana, have a good afternoon, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Well, thank you, John. Professionally done. In fact, you've done my job, so I'm not going to come up onto the stage. If you would all stand together, please. We'd like to take a group photo of the chair and the panelists. Photographers, please. Please stand. I understand you should all stand. And John, you're one of the tallest. Maybe the two tall ones can flank the others. Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. All right, a hand to them once again. Asante. Excellency High Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, your hands please as the chair of the panel, Chief Moderator, High Commissioner Sarah Cook, comes up onto the stage to assume a position, and the panelists as well. If you would please give them all a round of applause, give them heart. I'll leave it to her to welcome us to our residence later in the evening, but in the meantime, please enjoy the session. We are discussing opportunities available in the oil and gas projects value chain. Enjoy this one.
So, good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to my previous moderator, Mr. Elanga, who always does a fantastic job and has set the standard. Try again. Yes. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm the High Commissioner, British High Commissioner to Tanzania. And it's a real honour and a pleasure to be invited to moderate the session this afternoon, particularly as I know we have many British companies attending the Congress this week, and also some British companies here on the panel as well. So it's a real honour for me to chair this session this afternoon. And that's because I know the UK has over 50 years of oil and gas sector experience, and we want to share that experience with Tanzania as we work together to identify the opportunities available in the oil and gas projects value chain here in Tanzania. And we've got a fantastic panel for us this afternoon, representing nearly 200 years of experience between them in finding opportunities and finding solutions. They're here today to share their experiences and to share the best practice that they have learned during that huge experience that they have. And what we want to do is to identify ways that we can assist Tanzania to become the powerhouse of East Africa. So I'm delighted to introduce the panel this afternoon. Our first panelist is from Uganda, Mr. Ernest Rubondo, who's the Executive Director of the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. He has a background in petroleum geology and wide experience from commercial and taking a leading role with the Ugandan government to develop the oil and gas sector and attracting investment. And our second panelist is from Tanzania, Mheshimiwa Salim Shamte, who's the chairman of the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation. We know he's got over 40 years of experience in the agribusiness, and since retiring in 2017, he's been the chairman of the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation and a member of the Tanzania National Business Council. And then our third panelist, again from Tanzania, Mr. Matthew Manali, who's the Investment Promotion Director at the Tanzania Investment Centre. And he's worked at the TIC for over 20 years in a range of different roles. And then we have our colleagues from the UK, or British companies anyway. Eskil Jersing, who's the CEO of Wentworth Resources PLC, has over 34 years experience working across the spectrum of exploration to production and projects in many of the world's key petroleum basins across Africa, the UK North Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, Brazil, Southeast Asia, and Australasia, working with a wide variety of companies. And then we have a combined panelist who are going to give us a joint presentation, and that's Mr. Rod Branson, who's the Executive Consultant for Capital Projects Advisory at Advision. He's an experienced operations manager, project manager, and industry advisor with over 40 years' experience in the sector. And then finally, Mr. John Skepsis, again from Advision. He's the Global Director for Resource Infrastructure for Advision and Worley, and he has approximately 35 years' experience in the areas of engineering and project delivery. And I know they're going to work together to give us their joint presentation. So we're under strict time constraints. We have an hour and a half for this discussion. So I'm going to keep everybody to time. And like any good referee, I have my red card. So if you see me holding up the red card, it means please wrap up. Your time is almost up. Because what we want to do is to give time for discussion. I know you've had a lot of listening to presentations, to speeches, but what we'd really like in this session is to also hear from the audience and to have a discussion and a really good debate and dialogue. So as the panel, we've already discussed that we want to make sure we have enough time for that. So if I need to, I will be using my red card. So let me first invite our first speaker, who is Mr. Ernest Rabundu, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I'm glad to be among the 200 years of experience that is around the podium this afternoon. We have very little time, but I think it's fair that I start by thanking the organizers for putting together such a great conference, but also for inviting Uganda to be part of this investment conference. Usually when you're trying to attract investors, you try to keep it to yourself because your neighbor may take away some of your investors. So I would like to appreciate the very good gesture Tanzania has done to invite Uganda to be part of this investment promotion conference. We appreciate it. I would also like to thank the organizers for having invited me to be part of the speakers at this conference. I will be very brief indeed because the representative of the minister this morning said quite a few of the things that I had planned to say. And so the introduction will be very brief. I'll speak about the investment opportunities, and largely I'll talk about their structuring and their characteristics before a short conclusion. That is just a map of Uganda and where it is, and those are the parameters. I think many of the people around the hall know them very well. Just to show that long pipe at the bottom, the ECOP that we are all talking about, and we would like to achieve very, very much, and the minister's representative gave a position of where we are now. Just like to remind the audience also that in Uganda, the oil and gas sector is very structured along those three lines. There's a very clear entity, the ministry, which handles the policy and does the licensing, and that's their role. We also have the Petroleum Authority of Uganda, which I'm currently privileged to head, and our role is just to make sure that all the investors are working in accordance with the laws of the country. And we have a national oil company, which is represented here by its board members, whose role is to work like TPDC in this country and take forward the business aspects of the sector. The investment in the oil and gas sector in Uganda so far is close to $4 billion United States dollars, and we think that's a big achievement. That's how it's been ramping up over the last few years. And you can see that where it started going up quickly around 2006 is when the first commercial discovery was had. After that, it's been going up at that speed. And that, as they say, we ain't seen anything yet. Our expectation is that in the next 3 to 4 years, $15 to $20 billion will be invested in the country's oil and gas sector. And remember that the country's total GDP is about $27 billion. So this is a significant portion for the country. And we're all working very hard for it to be actualized. And I wanted to go on to the structure of investments because we talk a lot about investments in the oil and gas sector, but I thought that today I would talk about their structuring. Of course, the investments in the oil and gas sector include private sector investments, which we make a lot of effort to attract into our countries. There is a lot of public sector investment in the oil and gas sector, and I'll be able to share a bit of that. And there is no doubt that there are opportunities for public and private sector partnerships in the oil and gas sector. That is on a horizontal scale. But also on a vertical scale, the types of investments in the oil and gas sector can clearly be classified into three. You have the primary investors who are really like investing in exploration, the oil companies that come to do exploration, or the oil companies that come to build a pipeline, or the companies that come to build a refinery. We are looking at those as primary investors. Below them, you have the secondary investors. If you're going to do exploration, you will have companies drilling wells. If you're going to build a pipeline, you will have a company doing the actual construction, same as a refinery. So we consider the companies that are doing that work like secondary investors. You then have the tertiary investors, the even lower level investors. And these are the people who provide transportation, for instance. They are the people who provide the food. They are those who provide the hotel accommodation, and so on and so on. I'm sure the audience will appreciate that the secondary and tertiary investors are really dependent on the primary investors. The primary investors are the ones that really get everything going. And it is also easy to assume that the ones who are secondary and primary don't invest at all, but they just come to benefit. But I'm sure you will all appreciate that that's not correct. If somebody is coming to drill a well in Uganda or in Tanzania, they definitely do some investment. If somebody is going to provide transportation services, they definitely do some investment. So in order to approach this aspect of investment promotion quite efficiently, I think it's important to classify the investors in those respective categories. The figure here is just showing the investors that Uganda has, the primary investors Uganda has in the upstream sector. There isn't time to list all of them, but at least they are indicated there on the side. The middle also shows the investors that Uganda has in the midstream sector, but primary investors, those who are coming to do the work. And you'll appreciate that if those don't go, the kind of discussion that the representative of the minister talked about, it's with those primary investors. And it needs to get concluded to enable the secondary investors come on board. The third column there is about the downstream. And the downstream is very commercialized here. It's easy. I mean, it's been around for a long time, and there's a lot of participation in it. It's also important to note while at that slide that the risk is reducing as you go from upstream down to downstream. It's extremely risky in the upstream, it's less risky in the midstream, and it's even almost hardly any risk in the downstream. So there is that cascading along the value chain of the oil and gas sector. In Uganda now, there are opportunities for primary investors in the upstream, and I think, again, the representative of the minister talked about this, because Uganda has put out 5 areas for licensing. It was announced in May, and these companies, we are receiving applications for these areas, and that's a significant opportunity on the primary level in the upstream. Still in the upstream, but at a secondary level, the development projects that we have of development and production, both the Tilenga and Kingfisher, have very significant opportunities for drilling contracts because we expect about 400 wells to be drilled in the country. A lot of opportunities for logging and cementing and logistics and procurement, construction, and management. That is reinvestment at the secondary level, which is below the primary levels of investment. The next aspect are the opportunities at the secondary level in the midstream. I did say that at the primary level in the midstream, you have the companies that are planning to build the pipeline. And these are the companies that are already on the ground: Total, Sinok, Talo, the National Company of Uganda, and the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation. Those are at the primary level as far as the refinery is concerned. But then you have the secondary ones, which are really going to do the construction. And that's an opportunity at the secondary level for the pipeline development. The refinery in Uganda is still at the design stage, and so it is still being handled by the primary investors. But as soon as the designing is finished, it will definitely open up opportunities for the secondary level of investment in terms of construction and the other things that come along with it. I will not spend a lot of time on the downstream. That is very straightforward. It's also important to consider the participation of our countries along this value chain. You will appreciate that at the primary level, the participation of our country is still very low. I mean, there are not many companies in our countries that can participate in oil exploration, for instance, or take on building a pipeline or a refinery. What the countries are doing now is using the national oil companies to be the investors at the primary level. And even this is only kind of beginning now. We can admit that for now, at the primary level of investment, it is largely the foreign companies. It improves as you go through the as you go through the secondary, and by the time it comes to the tertiary level, there are even areas which have been completely defined as to be taken on only by the national companies. So there you are expected to have 100% national participation. I see my time is running out. I also just wanted to say something about the characteristics of the investments in the oil and gas sector. This is very important, especially for people in our countries, because we are beginning to get investors in our countries who have come very well when they have been told that it's happening, but they get very hurt along the way. And I think this is because the nature of the investment has not been made very clear. The investments in the oil and gas sector are certainly very high reward. When you have the opportunity to invest, it is very high reward. But at the same time, they are very risky. So you need to know that as you go along, they have ups and downs. And it is very unfortunate if you hit the down and you actually hadn't prepared for it at all. If we had time, I would have shared some examples, but we do have investors in our countries that have been completely burnt simply because they went into the sector without knowing this aspect. So it's important that players, and that's what we encourage a lot these days, that those who are investing in the sector and are new to it are informed of the need to diversify, to ensure that you are investing in the sector, but you have a level of diversification. And I think that's where I want to leave it. Just conclude by saying that Uganda has a modern and comprehensive framework for investing in the oil and gas sector. You are all welcome to invest in these primary, secondary, and tertiary aspects of the value chain in Uganda, and agree that both Uganda and Tanzania have very significant opportunities for projects and investments across our boundaries in the oil and gas sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ernest, and thank you for doing so well for sticking to time as well. I'm very grateful, and your presentation set out, I think, a really good framing of just the wide variety of opportunities that there are across the value chain in the oil and gas sector. So thank you for giving us that framing to start off our discussion this afternoon. So our next speaker is Mr. Salim Shamte, the chairman of the Tanzania Private Sector Foundation. Karibu.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Excellency. I don't have a presentation, so I'm just going to talk from my notes. I was asked to discuss this subject from the Tanzanian private sector perspective. I think since morning you've been hearing what our ministers and government officials have been saying, but from the Tanzanian private sector perspective, we do have some opinions, don't differ very much, but maybe looking at them from a different perspective. First of all, I want to confirm that Tanzania is a very attractive investment destination. And this we know, and we think that it is important that everybody recognizes this. In recent years now, as the private sector, we are partnering with the government and the public sector institutions to foster an attractive investment and business environment. This morning, there was discussion about a blueprint which addresses challenges, and implementation of the blueprint is already underway. Our guest of honor this morning was the minister in charge of investment in the Prime Minister's office. She had been appointed a few months ago. We have a lot of nuisance taxes and fees being abolished even in the last government budget. There is currently review of policies, regulations, and laws, and the tax administration is being streamlined. In the first session, you heard that corruption is a no-go area, and bureaucracy actually is not being tolerated. So we do have dialogue between the private and the public sector, and this is important. What we are pushing is that we should accelerate the pace of implementation and institutionalization of the mechanism to implement the blueprint. Foreign investment is critical for the development of our country. But what we would like to offer is that we should look at it from a little bit of a different perspective as a philosophy, in the sense that when they say win-win and that nobody should be left behind, we are looking at it from a business perspective, and that we would like to participate, to be players at the ownership level, not necessarily just jobs or supplies, food or whatever. We would like to be players at the ownership and the profit sharing level. Our president has voiced his intention or his ambition of creating at least 100 new billionaires by the time he leaves office. And you don't create billionaires through just jobs. You create billionaires in an ownership and a profit-sharing mechanism. And we would like to hear experiences around the room on what should be done and what can be done in order for us to achieve this, in addition to the technology and the skills transfers, which are very critical for the future of the sector. The Tanzanian private sector is young if you compare it to the private sector in many other countries, especially in the developed countries. And we are pursuing a private sector development policy which needs to strengthen the private sector, but to make it entrepreneurial and be able to be real players in a big sector like the oil and gas sector. And we are taking this Congress as part of our learning process in order to understand what needs to be done for us to be real players and not to be just, what do you call it, trickle-down policy, that we get a little bit of crumbs and we don't get part of the cake. This is important for us to learn. We are also aware of what is called a resource curse and the Dutch disease syndrome, in the sense that we are advocating that the oil and gas sector development should not be at the expense, or that we should be forgetting the other critical sectors like agribusiness, manufacturing, tourism, construction, transport, and other extractive activities. Our outlook is more regional. My Ugandan colleague here was talking about East Africans. Our outlook is more regional, and I think the investors should also have a regional outlook. Because now, as a country, we are firmly moving into regional presentations of East Africa Community, SADC, COMESA, and lately the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's very, very important. It widens our market, but at the same time, it makes us aware of the competitiveness which is going to be built around all these investments. So it is important that any investors coming should not be looking at Tanzania as Tanzania, but should be looking at Tanzania as part of a wider market situation. As I said earlier, we are taking this Congress as a learning process because we are sure that there are other projects which are coming on stream into the future. And in those projects, we really would like to be players in the real sense of players. Some of the projects which are already there, that's water under the bridge, and we should implement them as agreed. But as we look at second, third generation projects, we should be looking at how do you have local private sector as partners, as real partners, and not only government, because we think government does not create the billionaires which our president would like to do. So welcome to Tanzania. The local private sector is very eager and enthusiastic to join with you and to learn through you. And we think we are going to be very good students. Thank you very much, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, and it's really exciting to hear about the ambitions of the private sector here in Tanzania, and the way that you see the private sector here can play a really key role as a local partner, and not just in the country, but also in the region as well. So thank you very much for giving us those perspectives. So our next speaker, which flows very well from that presentation, is Mr. Matthew Mnali, who's the Investment Promotion Director from the Tanzania Investment Center. Karibu.
Yeah, my name is John Matthew Mnali. I'm the Director of Investment Promotion from Tanzania Investment Center. In my presentation, I'll focus on the investment climate. I understand that TPDC stands for Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation. They will present on the existing investment opportunities in the oil and the gas value chain. So in my presentation, I'll talk about the presence of the One-Stop Investment Facilitation Center, and also I'll talk about an economic overview of Tanzania. Why should investors come to invest in Tanzania? But this one has already been presented by the guest of honor in the morning, so I won't repeat. Then I will talk about existing investment incentives. Then we will take a look on the leading countries in terms of establishing investment projects in Tanzania. Our vision is to be a semi-industrialized country by the year 2025. So the aim of the government is to create or to build an industrialized economy. In so doing, a number of government institutions have been given tasks to do in order to achieve that goal. And one of such institutions is Tanzania Investment Center. So we have been given a mandate to promote various investment opportunities available in Tanzania, including opportunities existing in the oil and the gas value chain. But also, we have been given a mandate to assist all those investors who are showing interest to invest in the oil and the gas, together with other sectors, in terms of obtaining various permits, approvals, and licenses. And lastly, we have been given the role of advising the government on matters related on investment policy. Now, in assisting investors to obtain various permits, approvals, and licenses, the government has established a one-stop investment facilitation center where the government has stationed senior government officials under one roof in order to assist whoever is interested to invest in Tanzania, including the investors interested to invest in the oil and the gas sectors. Now, at the Tanzania Investment Center, the investors will be able to access services related to company corporation, business license, work permit, residence permit, environmental approvals, tax identification number registration, VAT registration, national identification number registration, and several other permits and approvals. The list is not exhaustive. In case an investor requires some other which are not available at the one-stop center, it is the role of the investment center to make sure that we apply on behalf of an investor, and then an investor obtain the required license, approval, or license. According to the World Economic Forum of 2017, Tanzania was ranked 5th among the fastest growing economies in the world. But likewise, in terms of, according to the Bank of Tanzania, in terms of GDP growth rate, it shows that for the past almost 10 years, we have experienced an average GDP growth rate of 7%, and the per capita income has also been growing. Likewise, inflation has been going down. For instance, last year we had only 3.5%. This is an area where I said the Honorable guest of honor presented in the morning, so I wouldn't take much of my time on that. Let me talk about the categories of investments registered in Tanzania. Basically, we have two main categories. We have normal investors and we have strategic investors. Normal investors are those investors, for foreign investors, if their minimum capital requirement is above 500,000 US dollars, then they can be registered as normal investors. But for the local investors, the minimum capital requirement should be around 100,000 US dollars, not less than that. And then apart from that one, we have another category of investors. We call them as strategic investors. Now for the foreign investors, the minimum capital requirement is 50 million US dollars, and for the local investors is 20 million US dollars. So the value of investment does not mean that the investors should come with hard cash, but rather this will be reflected in the value of capital goods that are brought in the country. And the difference between the two is the package of incentives that are given to the investors. For the normal investors, they are given the normal incentive package, whereby mostly when they import the project capital goods, they are exempted from paying import duty. And when they also import the so-called deemed capital goods, goods which are not capital goods, but might be required by an investor in the investment process. Now, those goods are deemed as capital goods. Now, if that happens, then the investors will be exempted to pay import duty by 75%. On VAT, it depends on the value of asset. If the VAT value of the asset which is imported is above 20 million shillings, then the investors will be exempted from paying the VAT. But the condition for that, in order to access such benefit, is the investors must be registered by VAT. Now, apart from that one, other non-fiscal incentives are such as automatic immigration quota for 5 expats, but for the oil and gas, together with the mining companies, the number can be extended beyond 5 because we don't have enough skills in that area. In terms of repatriation of profits or funds, the investors are allowed to repatriate their profits or to transfer, let's say, to pay foreign loans, to pay for royalties, fees, etc., as long as they have already paid, they pay the required taxes. So there is no restriction on that. Now, who qualifies for the strategic investor status? Number one, The size of investment for foreign investors must be 50 million US dollars, that's the minimum. Then the project must generate significant number of jobs. Then another condition, another criteria is if the project is located in a geographically disadvantaged area or if it is located in a special economic zone that can qualify an investor to become a strategic investor. Another criteria, if there will be a technology transfer, this can also be, an investor can access to that. This is the list of some of the investors who have already invested in Tanzania with their countries of origin. China is number 1, followed by UK, USA, and others. And existing investors that have already been registered are such as ExxonMobil, then we have Statoil there, they have changed the name recently. Then we have Total and others. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, and it's great to hear the role that the TIC plays in working with investors to enable investments to go forward in Tanzania, and particularly the role that you mentioned of your taking forward the economic blueprint that the Honourable Minister told us about this morning. So now we're going to turn to the companies and hear some of the experiences of working around the world from some of the leading companies that are here at the Congress this week. Firstly, I'd like to invite Mr. Eskil Jersing, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Wentworth Resources.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner, and distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all the other titles that are out here. Great to get the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon. What I'd like to do is run through a kind of a picture of what the next 10 years might look like, or more importantly, could look like. So everything I'm going to communicate with you is a suggestion. And ultimately, I have a legal disclaimer. Everything I say may be wrong, and it may not come true, but I sure as heck wish it does, for the sake of Tanzania and everyone in the room. I think what's really important in Tanzania right now, it's a critical juncture in terms of the domestic gas landscape, and that's the perspective I'm going to talk to you about today. We heard from Minister this morning that the aspiration of Tanzania is to be an industrialized economy in the next 5, 6, 7 years. And domestic gas, we believe, is a critical bridge to the future to kind of bridge that gap to first LNG, which is likely going to come in the latter part of the next decade. I think domestic gas has a huge potential to bridge that gap. Critically, what I heard last year at the conference, the theme was open, honest, transparent dialogue. And that clearly is starting to happen. We're starting to see movement in the system and encouraging signs that there's traction in oil and gas investments in the country. Tanzania has all the ingredients to be a regional gas champion. It has world-class resource, it has infrastructure through the national gas pipeline, and it has a hungry, young, growing, demand-hungry population. I think it's always important to look at, did that move? No, excuse me. It's not going forward. It's this one, isn't it? Sorry, the slides are not going forward, whoever has control. I hope I get a slight extension on my time on this. Right, thank you. What I was going to do, hopefully this will get resolved, was the next slide, and it'll come up in a second, is really to talk about context. I'm a geophysicist by background, which is almost a geologist. In a geology, the present is the key to the past, and I think with regards to the economic macro landscape, analogues are critical. Other countries have been in the position that Tanzania is today. A great example is Côte d'Ivoire. Côte d'Ivoire, some 20 years ago, recognized that it was too reliant on hydroelectric power, and it suffered a number of very significant droughts, and hydroelectric power took too much of the energy mix. And it decided it needed to do dramatic reforms. It's similarly to Tanzania. It had gas offshore, both in shallow water and deep water, albeit not at the kind of materiality that Tanzania has. But what it decided to do was encourage inward investment, it encouraged private-public partnerships, and it moved to a 2,000 kind of megawatt per day kind of environment very rapidly. And there are a number of IPPs, including Ciprel, Azito, and Agreco. And the grid has ultimately reached around 49% of coverage, and more importantly, electric access to the population is up to around 80%. Now, the population of Côte d'Ivoire is about 29 million, so roughly half of Tanzania. It currently has around 2,000 megawatts of power capacity, so a little bit larger with half the population. But what the point is, they opened the system up, it worked, and now they have a very wide-reaching kind of electricity distribution success story. For reference, as the minister said this morning, the current generation capacity in Tanzania is around 1,588 megawatts, with around a 35 to 40% electricity access rate. So there's a huge, huge potential to kind of change the game. The resource potential is unquestionable. The 3P gas initially in place offshore is upwards of 40 TCF, primarily in blocks 1, 2, and 4, operated by Shell and Equinor. And there's an opportunity in the long term for the domestic market obligation of that huge resource to provide gas through the existing infrastructure to enable the country to be a regional gas champion. At the moment, only 2 producing assets are actually providing gas into the system and providing 60% plus of the gas to power energy needs in the country. So that's Songo Songo and Manazi Bay. And effectively, all of the 2P reserves in country are locked up and focused on that effort to keep the lights on in the country. If I just focus in on southern Tanzania, there's basically a game of two halves in Tanzania with regards to gas today and gas in the future. In central Tanzania, you obviously have Block 4, and you have the Songo Songo facility. Our company with Moran and Prom, and more importantly with TPDC, is the only producing joint venture with TPDC, is based in Manazi Bay in the southern part of the country on the border with Mozambique. Critically, one of the things I see here is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity. We have a gas pipeline that is in place. It's only 15% utilized. It has around 760 million cubic feet a day capacity. There is a processing plant at Madimba with 210 million cubic feet a day capacity. It could be enlarged. We are producing a gross of about 90 million cubic feet a day into Madimba and into the national pipeline, and ultimately into the Kinyerezi and other industrial facilities in Dar es Salaam. But you can see, with regards to the map and the offshore discoveries, there's a huge, huge dramatic potential, both in existing 2C reserves, but also prospective resources yet to be tapped and yet to be brought into the system. And that is the LNG future. But today, it's only Manazi Bay in this area providing the production that is keeping the lights on. Very quickly, let's just have a look at Manazi Bay. Beautiful, beautiful location in the Rovuma down in Mtwara. It's a very simple story. It's a world-class reservoir. As I said, TPDC is our partner, and that's been very, very important. What's also happened of late in the last few weeks is we've seen refreshed optimism in terms of a landscape that is encouraging to invest further. And in particular, we've just recently signed our commercial operations date, which has brought the GSA into full effect. So we're very energized and happy that we've actually made this forward-looking step. And obviously that also enables a more commercially conducive environment for further investment capital into the asset, and to potentially bring the production from 90 million cubic feet a day up to 130 million cubic feet a day. And then even beyond that, to start infill drilling, step-out drilling, near-field infrastructure drilling, and pure exploration drilling. There's another 1.5 TCF of gas that we've recognized as relatively low-hanging fruit that resides on the asset. You know, my dad was an old oil man, and he always said, oil is where you find it. And it's the same with gas. You can see on the seismic line on the right, you can see the Manazi Bay field. But there's opportunities deeper, there's opportunities outboard, there's opportunities inboard. But obviously, in order to unlock them, you have to have a commercially conducive environment. And we're now in a full GSA to 2031. Should we get an extension, clearly we'll start unlocking all of that potential for the country. Back to the Bridge for the Future. I drove past Solander Bridge this morning. It's making super progress, and you'll probably see it on the way to the drink ceremony tonight. A fantastic infrastructure project, one of many in the country that are making a difference. This is the supply picture today. There are basically 2 companies in country, 3 if you include Songas, protected gas, but Songas, Pan-African, and Manazi Bay are basically supplying around 150 to 160 million cubic feet a day, and have been doing so for some time. There's volatility in the supply, partly due to the rainy season. You lose 10 or 15% due rainy season. But that's temporary, and that's obviously in Q2 of each year. But overall, the supply needs are kind of increasing of the order of 8% per annum. And that is just carrying on. And obviously, the demographic dividend is demanding more and more and more in the country. So it's a rush to be able to supply that demand. And if I move on to demand, or not, if I move on to demand, we have quite a in-depth, if you like, database of various parastatals and information and public-related information. But right today, it's about 160 million cubic feet a day. There are 4 gas-to-power plants planned in the next 2 or 3 years, and the demand could actually double in the domestic gas landscape. Now, obviously today, Kinyerezi 1 extension unfortunately is stalled due to the contractor Jacobson having liquidity issues. But equally, there's a tsunami of demand in terms of planned projects that are coming into the system, particularly Mtwara and Samanga. But also K1 extension when it commissions probably early next year. And any which way you kind of address the models, there is going to be a domestic gas shortfall, probably from late 2022 forwards. And who's going to fill that gap? It's only a couple of years away. LNG is not going to quite be ready. Domestic gas is your only option. There's only 2 players in the country who are going to solve that problem. So what do you need to do to meet those demand targets? Well, I think a simple way of looking at it is pressing buttons. There we go, right. So this is my last slide, apologies. In essence, one of the ways you could look at this is, we're in a phase now where we're at a critical juncture. There is and clearly should be a sense of urgency to unlock the system to aspire and achieve an increased production goal in the country for domestic gas ahead of LNG to allow the country to be ready for that material and dramatic binary change to the landscape. The catalysts, I think we've all talked about this, we've all kind of circled around the houses, are principally around regulatory and fiscal basis. Ongoing discussions are happening. They will release the horses, if you like, to allow for these targets to be met and for the country to accelerate towards an industrialized solution and be ready for LNG in the next century. There's a huge opportunity for investors to work more closely with the parastatals, with the government, but that needs to happen now and in the next 18 months for this to really work, because the demand crisis is upon us. So in short, what we need is fiscal stability, focused investment, sustainable local content, and capacity capability transfer, because ultimately Tanzanians are going to own and run this system, and that transfer of skills, knowledge, and capability needs to happen before 2028 for this to be a success. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, and apologies for the technical challenges there, but I think a really powerful presentation to identify what is a huge potential to be a regional gas champion here in Tanzania, but also some of the steps that need to be taken over the next couple of years, quite urgent steps to now enable that potential to be realised. And I think a very strong message that if we can work together now, we can enable that potential to be realised. So thank you very much. And finally, we have our two final presenters who are going to do a double act, I think. Firstly, we've got John Skepsis, who is the Global Director, Resource Infrastructure from Advision and Worley. And then he will hand over to Rod Branson. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. It's not that long ago that we'd come to an oil and gas congress and we'd discuss things like quality and quantity of the reserves in the field, the advances in process technology, piping and pressure vessels, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe we'd touch on preserving environmental values. Today's opening address resonated the shift in our business, talking to all things but that: nation building, industry participation, emissions, the energy transition, and social license. All the things that really matter to us today. It's a big shift, but what does it mean for us? I've been working in the infrastructure space for LNG projects for something like 35 years, as a young graduate initially, and working across the space of site selection, master planning, and all the things where these topics arise. There's no doubt that large, complex, onshore LNG and process industry projects are getting more complex in all countries, not just in Tanzania. The themes are common. There are more stakeholders. The attractive sites to participate and develop these projects are becoming more sparse at a very fast rate. Many of the attractive sites are also attractive sites from an environmental perspective or a social perspective, so the ability to be able to wade through all those challenges and come up with the right answers for our projects are getting harder. The non-technical risks are increasing in number and complexity. In the very early days, we used to apply the 75-25 rule. If you got 75% of the direct costs sorted, and you could define the process technology, design all the pumps and mechanical, you had the job nailed. We would then forsake the effort that was required to resolve the 25% because it would get sorted later. Looking at the risk allocation today on these projects, the 75% is really well defined now. The process technologies are understood, our ability to fabricate and to deliver the components of the project are all very well understood. It's the 25% that holds the majority of the risk on the project. The stakeholders are more engaged. The latent conditions on the sites are more complicated. The port conditions might not be satisfied easily anymore, requiring significant investment that would otherwise not be required. Its ability, the site's ability to support implementation can sometimes not be quite right, adding to the risk and cost of implementation phase. And this is where the most significant cost blowout occur. This plot up on the screen at the moment is a plot from Goldman & Sachs. They assessed 90 projects, major projects in the hydrocarbons and mining sector, and then came up with the reasons why many of those projects suffered delay in the implementation and or cost blowouts. When you look at that plot at the bottom bar, you see that only 21% of those projects suffered a delay because of technical risk. Just further emphasising the fact that technical is well understood and we know the direction it's heading in. When you look at the top bar, 73% of that sample size suffered delay because of non-technical risks. All the reasons we're here to talk about projects and Tanzania today. The central bar is 63%, also suffered some delay in schedule and risk because of contractual forgotten scope in the early works and enabling phase of projects. The interesting thing to me, working across a lot of these projects in the early phase today, is that we're competing for funds for delivery from the various companies, and the ability for us to work together and resolve those issues quickly is important. Oh, it worked first time, thank you. In our experience across the many regions and LNG projects, there's a number of lessons learned, significant lessons learned. We need to get these items right and try and get them right the first time. There's no single answer that fits every project, unfortunately. So a case study on a particular job may not fit with your project or your particular application. I wanted to touch on two today because I could spend a lot of time talking to all of them. The first one, the developer has a really big task ahead of them. They have the need for a significant increase in their own capacity to be able to address those challenging and sometimes conflicting needs of the project. Their teams are getting bigger and more complex, and the skill sets they need are getting more diverse. And Rod's going to come up on the stage in one moment and talk to that particular aspect as a previous employer of a significant developer and also as a consultant with Advisian. And then once Rod's finished, I was going to touch very briefly on the robust technical solutions that go beyond that 75%. We got the 75% nailed. What is the way of getting the correct and robust solution for the 25%? The site selection, the social issues, the environmental, and the infrastructure requirements that make those projects work. So I'm just going to hand over to Rod.
Thank you, John. I guess, first of all, I want to talk about what it takes for a developer, what capabilities a developer must have if they want to succeed in developing a major resource. And then I want to touch on something about Worley and Worley's most recent experience. I'm going to reverse that order, but before I say anything more about those two things, part of my background is that I was involved in the initial development of oil and gas in Australia. Perhaps that's why I've got grey hair. And then after that, involved with Malaysia in the early years of its development, then in Papua New Guinea for its PNG LNG project, which was a $20 billion project. And most recently, I was Operations Readiness Manager for Mozambique LNG. So preparing ultimately for the operation of that project, again a $20 billion project. And I was looking at after everything from the bottom of the well to the ship flange. Okay, let's first look at the what Worley has done. And the first slide reflects some of that. Worley was involved right from the outset with the Mozambique LNG project. It looked at the offshore facilities as the the owner's engineer for the concept and for pre-feed. Then the onshore plant as well, again as the owner's engineer for the onshore scope. It provided oversight of the feed contractors and was involved in the pioneering work, the temporary facilities that are necessary to get a project off the ground in a greenfield location, and that includes things like the marine offloading facility where you start with a ramp onto the beach and gradually you build up bigger and bigger things. And John was involved in that particular review. Then in overall project management, Worley's been involved in the readiness of the project to actually be executed. The project executive called in Worley and said, take a look at the way we've got things structured. Do you think we're going to succeed with the way we've got things organised? We want your independent review and to provide us with some assurance that we've got it right. I'm pleased to say that from an Anadarko point of view, we had most things right because I was working at Anadarko at that stage. And I'm also pleased to say that from Worley's point of view, they were able to point out some shortcomings. As of now, we are, Worley is the owner's engineer for the next 5 years for the Mozambique LNG project. And that's based upon our great length of experience and, of course, the history with Mozambique LNG. We're also at the advanced stages of discussion with, well, Total now, it was Anadarko, of course, about operations readiness facilitation. And that's an important aspect. It's that transition between when you've designed and constructed something and you're getting ready to operate. You want to be sure that when you press that button, that metaphoric button for things to go, that you've covered everything. And since some speciality is operations readiness, I have a checklist that's got 912 items on it. Okay, the next slide shows on the right-hand side, the traditional 3 items that a project manager would look at. What am I going to deliver? The cost and schedule and impact are the 3 things. Worley has developed the input, the 7 categories of aspects that a developer needs to address to ensure that they are going to be capable of actually delivering appropriately. And that's a tough set of ones to address. So what I'm going to do is, rather than, sorry, let me go to the next slide, if we can make it work here. What I've taken there is, in this slide and the next slide, the 7 items that appeared on the previous slide have been split up into various items. I'm not going to go through every single item, but I am going to comment on those items that I think are worthwhile making comment upon as a result of both Worley's experience and my personal experience over an extended period of time in the countries I mentioned before. One of the key things to get it right is you must have thought about your organisation. If you're a developer, you need to know how to organise things, how to organise your people, what groups of people are going to be in your structure. I wrote the organisation plan for Mozambique, so I know the extent to which that's involved. You put the numbers of people in the various categories and you make sure you've got everything covered. The other thing is that you need to make sure that organisation structure is one that can be able to expand. So you start off with a totality, you start off with the endpoint, and then you go back and say, well, right now I only need this, but you need to grow it with the long term in mind. The other aspect is ensuring that you've got adequate capacity to deal with external interfaces. There are a multitude of interfaces in a $20 billion project, particularly one that's got offshore component and an onshore component, as you might have in the southern part of Tanzania soon. And certainly we have in Mozambique, and we had in Papua New Guinea, in fact in most of them. Papua New Guinea was a particular challenge because you had jungles, fast-flowing rivers, you had mountains, and you had a 750-kilometre pipeline in between the gas wells in the highlands and the LNG plant near Port Moresby. So lots of interfaces, particularly with communities. At one stage we had 230 community liaison officers in the highlands. And we put 8,000 semi-trailer loads of goods up an 800-kilometre highway into the mountains. So you went through a lot of villages and you needed to deal with those aspects. Lots of external interfaces. You will have lenders, consultants. Every project that I've ever worked on borrows money, except if you're ExxonMobil or somebody like that. So the lenders want to know that you're spending their money wisely. As a project developer, you have to recognise that you have to manage the fact that you're borrowing money and that the lenders will have their own consultants looking over your shoulder and making sure that you're not spending the money unwisely. And what's more, they will have consultants looking at making sure that the impact that you're having upon the nation in which you're developing this is being done according to the Equator Principles and the IFC guidelines. And a lot of time and effort is needed. You need to be sure that you've got the people to be able to cope with that. You need to recognise too that your demands on the administrative capability of the government of the nation in which you're developing it may be stretched. I know that's the case in PNG, and it was initially down in Mozambique. And in PNG, we simply had to assist by providing people under contract to assist the government to process the paperwork, not for the approvals, but simply for processing the paperwork. You need to be able to respond to the demands of the local community quickly. Don't pretend that it'll go away. It won't. You have to address it, and address it quickly, and you've got to have the people, the structure, and the supervision management to ensure that that happens. One of the particular aspects of that is that no matter whether you're doing it in a well-developed nation or a less well-developed nation, it matters not. You will have the have-nots. The people who are just on the periphery are not directly impacted by anything you're doing. You may have compensated the landowner for whatever impact you've had upon that landowner, but the landowner down the road gets nothing because you've had no impact on him. You need to manage the have-nots. The other aspect in a project of any magnitude, and certainly one of $20 billion, is don't have any surprises. Yeah. Sorry, yep, I will. There are many, many more of these aspects that I'm happy to talk about at any time, and those go on for quite a long list. And we both have a lot of experience in covering those. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and apologies for cutting you short. I think it's been a fantastic set of presentations from all our panelists. I think what I've certainly taken away a sense of the potential here in Tanzania to be a regional gas champion, the growing dialogue and partnership that is happening to realise that potential, the ambition of the local private sector to partner with international companies, and how TIC can support investors who want to come to Tanzania, and also just the range of different opportunities across the value chain for primary, secondary and tertiary investors to look at. And then very useful to hear the very specific examples and lessons learned from projects about the benefits of early planning, thinking through what those non-technical risks could be, and the range of issues that they could cover, and how to manage those risks to avoid delays to the projects. So I think it's been a very rich set of presentations. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for sticking to time. We've now got about 15 minutes before the end of this session to have a chance for a bit of a dialogue and a discussion. So I'd love to get some questions from the floor. Our panelists have all said that they would be very happy to take questions, or if you have any comments or reflections on what you've heard during this panel session this afternoon. So please raise your hand if you have any questions. I'll take 2 or 3 questions together, and then we can come back to the panel. So I have a question here at the front. Any other contributions? No? Well, let's start here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
If you could
Excellency.
say who you are and which organization you represent as well. Thank you.
Perfect. My name is Prosper Victus. I work with Ndovu Resources. And my comment, or rather a question, is directed to the CEO of Wentworth. In your presentation, you highlighted the fact that there is a possibility of problems associated with the supply of gas in the near future. And we're wondering whether you can share with us what can be done to mitigate this kind of a risk or a potential for the decrease from the developer's point of view, the government, if there are things that the government can do, or institutions such as PURA and TPDC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prosper, for the question. It's a very good question. The answer is, by nature, broad-ranging. I think one of the comments I made about the theme that was evanescent in last year's conference was open, honest, transparent dialogue, and I've seen it again today. What I would like to clarify, though, is that I don't think there's a supply issue. So it's not a case of the assets will not be able to supply the gas. I think the issue is the demand is creeping up upon us quite rapidly, and the demand is material, and that's obviously driven by a rapidly growing industrialized economy that's moving in that direction. In terms of what can be done to boost the supply from the existing two producers, and let's not forget there are also discoveries onshore along the infrastructure corridor that could be fast cycle opportunities, particularly Ammonex or particularly Dodsol, for example, in the north. They could also be fast-tracked and accelerated to unlock scope for further supply into the system. But with regard to producing assets currently, clearly there are a number of ongoing fiscal debates and discussions with regards the PSA reviews. There are discussions with regards commercially conducive investment environments, and those particularly will relate to tenure on the license with regards to the length and duration of the PSAs. Our PSA in Manazi Bay is up in 2031. And Songo Songo up in 2026. And clearly, we are all here for the long term. We want to invest sustainably for the future. We want to lift the production to such a point where we can meet some of the president's mandated targets. I mean, he recently talked, I believe, about being able to ultimately get to 400 million cubic feet a day and use some of that production potential and capacity to actually export it to neighboring countries like Kenya, for example. So I think what needs to happen, as I said in the last slide, is that fast tracking of those commercial discussions and enabling of the assets to allow them to unlock the reserves that are in the ground and to increase the production capacity with the infrastructure that's already in place. So it really is about fast tracking. I do believe that there is a potential demand crisis coming on us, and clearly the country needs energy, and we all need to work together to resolve that in the next 18 months.
Thank you. Really important for us to hear that urgency, actually. Are there any other questions, reflections, or comments from the audience? Don't be shy. Maybe if I could ask you, Rod, I mean, you had other things that you wanted to cover in your presentation. Are there particular risks that you wanted to flag? You were talking about the benefits of early planning, the looking at the range of non-technical risks that could emerge out of projects. I think this very concrete commercial experience and project delivery experience would be very valuable. So please, any other thoughts?
Thank you. Have I got it on there? Yep. One of the ones that I think people lose sight of is that a project of the nature of the one in Mozambique, the probable one here in Tanzania, and the one in PNG, you're talking about projects of $20 billion US. And when you are spending money every day, you need to spend it fast because you're getting no revenue back. You're putting your hand in your pocket every day and you haven't got an income. So you can't take your time. You have to do it fast. And therein lies a problem, a dilemma, because if you spend $20 billion in 5 years, which is 4 years to 5 years, is about the normal time for one of those projects. You're spending $10 million per day, 365 days a year for 5 years. You must have effective controls of your expenditure. Otherwise, it'll blow out.
Those are big numbers, and so it's important to have that realization. Thank you. Please, any other questions or thoughts? In the front here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your Excellency, you note that these are huge projects. They require a huge amount of money for financing purposes. Can you share experience? How do you structure these projects? How do you mobilize financing for these projects? Are there any challenges, lessons that we can basically pick? Thank you.
Okay. The normal length for one of these projects is dictated by just how many people you can put on the job to execute the work. And so there's a limitation to how many people you can employ without them falling over each other in a rough sense. For these $20 billion projects, to do it in 4 years to 5 years, you're talking about